So I'd like to welcome everybody to a briefing by Mr. Shawn Steene, Senior Force Planner for Emerging Technologies in the OSD Strategy and Force Development Office in the Office of the Undersecretary of Defense for Policy. Mr. Steene's portfolio includes emerging technologies and S&T, including autonomous weapon systems policy and directed energy weapons policy. He'll be speaking with us today about the DoD's policy on autonomous weapon systems and his associated work at the UN Convention on Certain Conventional Weapons. Shawn, we're pleased to have you, and let me get your slides up for you and we'll get going.
Alrighty, and Ryan or anybody else, like I have been told before that if I get away from this tablet, it may get quiet. So if that's a problem, please just let me know.
Okay, can you see my screen, Shawn?
Yes.
All right, off you go.
All right, next slide, please. All right, so this is just sort of the standard opening disclaimer here, right? We have a shocker. We have a new administration. As always, any and all policies are subject to review and revision by any incoming administration. This one is no different. Having said that, like I don't have any particular information or any reason to believe that a change in approach in toward autonomous weapon systems or the DoD Directive 3000.09 is being contemplated or anything like that. And in fact, I would foot stomp the continuity and approach and policy on autonomous weapons from November of 2012, when the directive was first signed out by then Deputy Secretary Ash Carter, to the present. So, which is to say, through the pretty much second term of the Obama administration and through the Trump administration. So I think, it's fair to say we've had a high degree of continuity with respect to the policy. Slide, please. So bottom line up front, if you take nothing else away, I would hope you would take these three things away on this topic. Despite a fair degree of misunderstanding on this point within the department, outside of the department, autonomous weapon systems are permitted under DoD Directive 3009, but they are subject to more scrutiny, to senior review and approval. The directive is focused, or the policies in the directive are focused on the human role in selecting targets and in making the engagement decision. It's not about, from the directive's guidance, it's not about the control technology or methodology. I frequently run into people who are in sort of the technical and capability development community, right? And even if you go back to the Defense Science Board Summer Study on Autonomy, they focus on the control methodology rather than just the role of the human, period, full stop. But that's not how the directive does it. And the last point would be that operational context is key. Like I would argue any weapon, right? A given autonomous weapon system may be appropriate in one operational environment and in one context, but using it in a different operational environment in a different operational context may not be appropriate. Slide, please. So,
hey, Shawn, can I just ask a quick question?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, Bob Sowski. What's the distinction between a program and R&D? Let's say 6263 versus an acquisition program. Is the policy against all acquisition programs, or can there be research in that fully autonomous, for example?
There absolutely can be research. The policy requires, and actually you're a great setup, man. The policy requires the senior review and approval at two stages. I would argue the most important one is before fielding, right? Before you're going to use this in a real world operational context. But the other one, which is really, I like to say, more of a good government one, is before formal development. Now, the directive itself doesn't really specify what that means, but it absolutely is clear that it is not limiting research and
the person at 937
and so forth. It is really You can research and do S&T to your heart's content.
Please leave a message.
Sorry, I had to unmute there. So I don't know quite when you lost. S&T is allowed when it becomes a formal development, and in the process of, we have a handbook that I'm trying to get developed here. We would argue that for major acquisition programs, that's easy, right? That's milestone B. But for other than that, we would tie it to the end of the end of the R&D phase. I'm a policy guy, not an acquisition guy, so I would have to go look at the specific verbiage. But there's a safety review that correlates, I think, with the end of the engineering and material development phase, and that's where we would go. But no, the intent is, just to beat a dead horse, not to limit research. Over. Does that answer? All right. In the interest of time, I'm going to hope that it does, and if not, we'll get a follow-on. So the three basic things here that the directive is aimed at is minimize the probability and consequences of unintended engagements, which are defined, but I mean, it's a definition of exactly something you didn't expect, something you didn't intend. Whether that's often it's thought of in terms of civilians or civilian objects, but it's not limited to that. It would be blue on blue. It could be, anything you didn't intend to strike. The baseline thing is it's all about allowing the commander and operator to exercise appropriate level of human judgment over the use of force. And by the way, it requires that those that authorize, direct, or operate autonomous weapon systems, do so with appropriate care in accordance with the law of war, applicable treaties, and so forth. We touched on the senior review and approval. And again, the foot stomp is they're permitted, but subject to more scrutiny. Slide, please. So again, operational context is key. And why do we say that, right? There are a variety of technical and operational challenges that would differ, right? Depending on what kind of weapon is this, right? We say autonomous weapon system. It's this very broad thing. I would posit that major combat operations in the air or in the maritime domain are going to be really pose different set of challenges than, for example, counterinsurgency in an urban city center. I'm not saying one is good and one is bad. I'm just saying that one is harder than the other in terms of discriminating targets and all of those sorts of things that would be involved. And I believe that you could say that we would be able to impose certain controls that would facilitate appropriate use of an autonomous weapon system. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, let's look at, for example, the Hellfire 9X, the one that uses the blades, right? That is relying on physically, kinetically striking the intended target, right? So your collateral damage, like there is no blast radius, there's not a real adjacency problem, right? I'm not saying that means that it's a get out of jail free card. I am saying that it poses a different set of challenges and a lower degree of challenge. Next slide. So then we move on to the international discussions in the group of governmental experts on emerging technologies in the area of lethal autonomous weapon systems. And for many of you, I mean, I see certain people in the audience like John Cherry, Chris Corpola. You guys this is old news for you guys. and I guess I apologize for that, but not really, because I think it bears repeating. The U.S. delegation's objective is to preserve the ability to develop and use these things without new legal restrictions. And I say that because we already have restrictions. We have the law of war, which in the parlance of the diplomats, international humanitarian law, right? That part of the law that relates to what you have to do with respect to civilians and civilian objects and so forth. We hear a lot from the NGOs, who are sort of the umbrella organization, for those of you who don't know, under which all this falls, is the Campaign to Stop Killer Robots. I will just call that sort of the ban camp, as in they want a ban on such weapons. They routinely threaten to negotiate a standalone treaty, right, like they did with the Ottawa Convention for landmines, like they did with the Oslo Convention for cluster munitions, which in the parlance, they want to take it outside, right? They want to take it outside of the Convention on Certain Conventional Weapons. I'm not saying this isn't a real possibility, but frankly, I think if they could have done it already, they would have done it already. So not that we don't want to be mindful of that and try to avoid that happening, but I don't think we should overreact to that threat either. The guiding principles from the law's GGE are good progress, and we can and should develop them further to continue that progress. Next slide, please. And I've got a slide here for those of you who may be wondering what those are, and you can find all those on the web, but I've got a summary. I had to condense them a little to get them on one slide, and it's still a bit of an eye chart, but my last slide contains those points. So if you're wondering, hold on. So those talks in the international community have been going since 2014. They were informal discussions in 14, 15, and 16, and the GGE shifted or started as the format in 2017. As a practical matter, the 2014, 15, 16, and then subsequent ones under the GGE are effectively the same. There are some technical differences, but for all practical purposes, I would argue those are basically the same thing. Not a huge shift in 2017. As I say, the NGOs want to threaten to take it outside. They're still threatening to do that. We should maintain some calm about that. Again, our overarching objective: avoid new legal restrictions, which does not preclude elaborating how the law of war specifically impacts the development and the use of laws. We're quite good with that notion. We just aren't as interested in pursuing a new treaty or protocol at this time. So our objectives, generally speaking, we want to keep the discussion in the Convention on Certain Conventional Weapons. We think that's a very good forum. We think it's a forum that lends itself to bringing various experts, not just conference on disarmament diplomats, but also military technical experts, legal experts, and so forth. We're trying to reduce public and diplomatic concern about, quote, killer robots, and also promote an understanding of how these technologies and weapons that result from them could actually advance humanitarian interests, right? Often we only seem to talk about the chamber of horrors that could result, and we run the risk of leaving on the cutting room floor any of the benefits that such weapons could provide, to include in humanitarian terms. And last, we, as I said, want to promote a greater understanding of how the law of war already provides a robust framework for regulating weapons and conflict. Slide, please. So I'm not trying to call anybody out here, but just so you know, right, typically the states that have been sort of spearheading the ban camp, if you will, right, because the campaign and the NGOs are given seats in the discussions. but they're not parties to the, I mean, all of this is being done under the Convention on Certain Conventional Weapons, and only states are parties to that convention. So while the campaign, which is an umbrella organization, right, while the campaign and its constituent members are in the room and can hear and are even allowed to speak, they don't get to decide. They only can persuade. So the states that are sort of the prime movers behind a ban are Austria, Brazil, and Chile. A large part of the NAM, and the NAM as an organization likes to talk about how it is in support of a ban, but there are some notable members of the non-aligned movement who are not in favor of a ban. It's diplomacy. Germany has been the forefront of those that have pushed for a, quote, political declaration, not necessarily a legally binding instrument, i.e. protocol or treaty, but something else. And there are a lot of states, too many really to warrant mentioning on a slide like this, I'd run out of room, that would be interested in, you know, quote, doing something. One of my favorite Reagan quotes is applicable here. You know, don't just do something, stand there. Like, we run the risk of doing something for the sake of doing something and having it prove negative. COVID has been a big impact on all of these discussions, just like it has with everything else, right? Geneva is a bit of a COVID hotspot, or has been, which is really complicating things. So we had no face-to-face meetings in 2020. There was a lot of opposition from certain corners to virtual meetings. I.e., you know, we did have one meeting. I shouldn't say we had no face-to-face meetings. We had a hybrid meeting in which the permanent representatives from the delegations that are in Geneva, one per country, were in the room with appropriate spacing and all of that. And then the members of the delegation that would normally be there, people like me, the representative we typically send from the Office of General Counsel, Chairman's Legal, Joint Staff J5, we were all, and our state colleagues, we were all there virtually in the same manner that we're having this meeting right now. That met with a fair amount of opposition, most notably from Russia, but a lot of, some irony, the NAM countries also objected to this kind of thing. It should be noted that even in 2021, and the March meetings were just deferred because they don't think they'll be able to do that. This is affecting every issue, right? So anything that is being done by the UN office in Geneva or at the Palais there is facing this problem with COVID. And so the law's GGE is competing for space and time with all those other issue sets. So that's another complicating factor. As everything gets pushed to the right, everything is getting pushed to the right and is competing for that limited physical space and time. So next slide. My last slide, and then I'm hoping we can have some good Q&A. These are the current, these are a version condensed only for space. You can find the full version, but of the guiding principles that have been agreed by the law's GGE. The GGE operates on consensus basis. So everyone, the United States, China, Russia, you name it, everyone has signed up to these principles. So what we, the U.S. delegation, are trying to do, and there are others with us, don't get me wrong, are sort of advocate that there's a lot of meat we could put on these bones and flesh out what exactly this means so that countries, states that are interested in responsible development and use of these capabilities would be better able to do that. With that, I'd like to open it up to questions, and we can hopefully have a good Q&A discussion. Over.
Hey, morning, Shawn. This is Mike Zecca
Hey,
from the
Mike.
Armament Center. How you doing? So let me start it off. So I've heard you talk about this many times. Are you aware of any of the services that are developing autonomous weapon systems that are going to go up to the Senior Weapon Review Board? Over.
So what I regularly get in response to that sort of issue is, I'm trying to get my hands in soon. There is one thing that I suspect may come sooner rather than later. I will say that I've had different things where people want to talk to me about them, and then you find out that this is all notional due to the line or whatever, but System X is under development, and Spiral 3 or 4 of System X may include, it's either an autonomous system that's not armed and therefore wouldn't need it, but Spiral 3 or 4 might be armed, or it's, an armed semi-autonomous thing, which would not require the review and approval under the directive, but there's a plan for a Spiral in the future that could potentially be autonomous and therefore would. So that's sort of the best I can answer that, is that I am not aware of a concrete thing that is, slated for senior review. There are some things that are under development that I am told we will see in the soon trademark timeframe. Over.
Okay, thank you very much. Yeah, as you know, we're several years away within the Army from getting
Roger.
Raghu, you have a hand up?
Yes, indeed. Thank you. So looking into the future and the past at the same time in some ways, during the Cold War with missile technology and stuff, our adversary, which of course in those days was the Soviet Union, we would probably not know what they were doing by way of R&D, but at least when they did pull the missiles out, we had means of observing and perhaps inferring what they were up to. Now, looking forward in the world of autonomous weapon systems, how would we be aware of what the peer competitors are doing? Over.
Yeah, no, that is kind of, that is one of, maybe it's not the only, but that is certainly a $64,000 question. When we get this in not infrequently, academics or, NGO types, what exactly, other than when you're talking about like a treaty, and I know you didn't necessarily raise that, but this gets to this problem, right? That which makes a thing autonomous is in the software, in the guts of it, as you will, right? I've had people who are like, well, we managed to do things with the Soviets in terms of like nuclear arms control, and you're like, sure, and we could count the physical items. We had physical dimensions. We could come with some pretty reasonable engineering analysis about throw weights and ranges and so forth, right? In a way that what makes a thing an autonomous weapon system versus a semi-autonomous weapon, boy, you'd have to really be deep in the guts of that control software to be able to determine that. And how are you going to get that? I think all of this is really problematic. So even if one were an advocate, and I'm not, but even if one were an advocate for some sort of international protocol on this, you really would be setting up almost like the Bioweapons Convention, right? It would just have to be on faith. And the problem is the BWC sort of works because we all came to this decision that we really didn't want to do this anyway, and for its own sake. And so we're all kind of just agreeing to not do something that really has a lot of downsides that we really don't want to do anyway. I would argue that dynamic is not applicable here. So you're very right, and I don't. Maybe someday there will be a technical solution to that problem, but not that I know of, and not that is on the horizon as far as I can imagine. Over.
Well, thank you very much. Fascinating.
Mr. Touchton.
Hi. I think you may have actually answered my question, but let me just make sure. I just wondered if you could compare and contrast what we're talking about here with fire and forget weapons that are pretty self-governing once they're launched, like torpedoes and certain, missiles.
So the directive addresses this in terms of they are defined as semi-autonomous, right? Which is I'm flipping through it right now so that I can give it to you verbatim. I could probably come close, but there's a risk there. Come on. So semi-autonomous, the short definition of a semi-autonomous weapon system in the directive, the first sentence is a weapon system that once activated is intended to only engage individual targets or specific target groups that have been selected by a human operator. Then it goes on, this includes, right? And so the last paragraph of the definition reads, quote, fire and forget, unquote, or lock on after launch homing munitions that rely on tactics, techniques, and procedures to maximize the probability that the only targets within the seeker's acquisition basket, when the seeker activates, are those individual targets or specific target groups that have been selected by a human operator. So that's sort of the out, if you were, in colloquial terms. Those homing munitions and those lock-on after launch munitions are defined as semi-autonomous weapons. So that torpedo, that air-to-air missile,
Did we lose Shawn?
I lost him.
Me too.
All right, we'll give him just a moment.
I was kind of hoping it was me so I could go back and listen to the recording.
Yeah, JC, you're on deck, by the way, after Mr. Touch.
That was really a hard stop for Shawn.
Yeah.
That's unfortunate.
Good until 12:30. JC, did you want to?
Well, hopefully he's going to log back in.
Yeah. Okay. Looks like it. Yeah. There he is. Got him. Shawn, are you back with us? Saw him come in. He's muted.
Yeah, I saw him. I admitted him.
Yeah. Shawn, are you there? He keeps muting and unmuting. There he is.
yeah, I don't know what happened. All of a sudden it just went away, and I was like, oh.
Yeah, we felt the same, Shawn.
So I'm not sure how far I was along, but basically those lock-on after launch munitions qualify under the directive as semi-autonomous, so they don't require senior review and approval. Over. That's the real short answer.
All right, thank you. So so if a system was fairly autonomous to the point where it could realize it needs to change that package, is it permissible under that definition, assuming that there's time and connectivity, that it could dialogue with the human operator and they could go ahead and make that change as a human approval? And then
so sure, I guess I would say if the weapon has modes that are autonomous and semi-autonomous, then you're going to need the senior review and approval for the.
no.
No. Maybe we need to turn off video.
Yeah, Shawn, if you can hear us, maybe turn your video off. Oh, this is unfortunate. The world of working at home. I've been on video with Shawn the last few days, several times, and never had him freeze or go away.
Those non-aligned movement folks are getting in the way, I guess.
Mm-hmm. We do have a lot of people in this meeting too. I don't think that should be causing Shawn to go away though.
I don't think so.
Well, my backup plan is to always blame it on sunspots because no one can prove me wrong.
I don't know if that's true.
Well, maybe.
Right.
Maybe not in real time, at least.
Yeah.
I'm back.
Exactly.
We've done DARPA PI meetings where we say, hey, everybody use your phone. And I don't know if we would lose him if he was on his phone.
As yeah, for the audio, it works.
Refinance it. It's fine. It's talking about the, what was it, the May-ish 2020 refinance, and was that our original? Was that our original?
That was
mortgage?
the first time we refinanced.
Okay. So yes.
Yeah, I was wondering what Charles was talking about.
I helped him out.
It was related.
Helped him not embarrass himself. Shawn, are you back?
I didn't see him come back in.
I did.
I was Shawn O'Hara. No.
Shawn. Oh my goodness, this is unfortunate. There he is. I'm going to ask him to take his camera off. Shawn? Shawn, can you hear us? Shawn. I see him there. He's on mute.
Mute.
There you go. We got you. Maybe leave your camera off for us, okay?
Yeah, I was calling in. I was going to try to phone in, but I don't know. That doesn't seem to be working real well.
Okay.
All right. So long and the short of it is, if it's got, I think where we were, right, was if there are multiple modes, semi-autonomous and autonomous, again, not prohibited, but the autonomous mode would require, senior review and approval. And I may have lost the bubble in frenetic reconnection. So apologies if that's.
No, I think you're getting to it just fine. Yeah, and so the main thing is that in my imagination of something that we could maybe explore further in other venues is, but the idea is that it would be acting on the semi-autonomous mode, but it would be still running its autonomous mode in the background to realize that maybe the original instructions weren't going to be effective or had some flaw in it, that that there's a better course of action that it has discovered but can't act on because it's acting in semi-autonomous mode, and therefore if it was able to have connectivity back to a human operator and present this alternative plan, and then it could be redistributed or okayed, close the loop back in the semi-autonomous action mode to say, here's your, we have this new plan approved, and you will, semi-autonomously act on it now.
Okay, I think I understand. So this gets to the definition of an autonomous weapons system under the directive, right? A weapon system that, once activated, can select and engage targets without further intervention by a human. So really, DoD D 3000.09 is only relevant or concerned with the human's role or lack thereof in, and this is an operator or commander, not a designer or developer, in selecting targets and making basically the engagement decision, weapon release in a sense. So if the system is autonomously working out like various and sundry courses of action, yada, 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 it can do that to its heart's content. The rub is going to come if and when it is selecting targets and making the engagement decision. If it is phoning back to some sort of commander or operator to hire, as it were, saying, I think I should strike, and I am anthropomorphizing the system when I say this, so apologies, but no, if it is actually nominating targets and a human says, yes, strike that, that's semi-autonomous. You don't even need senior approval for that. Over.
Okay. All right. Well, that's exactly what I was trying to get to. So thank you very much.
You bet.
Thank you, Mr. Touchton. JC, the floor is yours.
Hey, thank you. I don't know how far you want to go down that path, but I was wondering if you could kind of give us an overview of what the concerns are for those who are seeking a ban, and where would they like to draw the line, just as background, so we understand better what the concerns are and whether we think they are legitimate or they are, superfluous.
So it's a little challenging. I think that is a worthwhile thing, and that's actually a really good question. No surprise, JC. So first thing to note is that the campaign is an umbrella organization, right? So I forget how many organizations there are now, and the list keeps growing, but the initial one, or the sort of first among equals, if you will, is Human Rights Watch. But there's also the International Committee for Robot Arms Control, Article 36, and they're up to, there's over a dozen of them for sure. I say that because that complicates the answer, in that, they all are somewhat, they're a coalition, they're independent. What might satisfy Article 36 might not satisfy Human Rights Watch, or vice versa. The arguments that they have as a collective presented range from, you'll never be able to have these things will never be able to be used in compliance with international law because they can't do the proportionality assessment, they won't satisfy the discrimination requirement, etc. Those sort of arguments have faded somewhat. Many of you recall the so-called Slaughterbots video from circa 2017, for example, put out by, among others, Stuart Russell, right? The system they were positing in that video was the heart and soul of discrimination, right? The whole point of this thing was it was killing specifically targeted individuals and leaving the person next to them alone. So that undermines the it'll never be discriminate argument. right? So they've sort of moved away from some of those sort of arguments into a set of arguments that rely a lot more heavily, for example, on their interpretation of the Martins Clause. I'm not a lawyer. I spend a lot of time with lawyers as a result of this, but in a nutshell, the Martins Clause originated as a conference-saving device at a Hague Convention in, I don't know, 1903, 1908, where the big powers of the day were arguing that these partisans, the francs-tireurs, right, were just bandits, and they were going to summarily execute them almost like pirates. And so the little powers objected to this and said, and so got this Martins Clause in, which basically says, if no other part of international law is operative, you gotta go with morality and the public conscience. You got to be guided by the public conscience. These NGOs have taken this argument and said, well, we have polling data that shows that there's widespread public opposition to the idea of a machine deciding to take a human life. Well, that's not really what our fundamental argument is, that the Martins Clause isn't really applicable. We have the law of war. Why is this not operative? The other argument that they sort of have tended to make is rooted more in escalation dynamics, that we have seen machines in Wall Street, operating at machine speed lead to so-called flash crashes. And won't we see a similar thing causing an unintended escalation of a crisis into a hot war? My personal counter to that is, well, we would really be one, we're designing weapons to operate under the war paradigm. Don't use them in a not war paradigm. And if you do, you should expect bad things to happen. Why are we arming a system and then sending it into a crisis? Right? That's just bad, foolish on our part. But those are kind of the principal sorts of arguments. The morality argument that it's just inherently wrong for a machine to make a decision to take a human life, and that there will be these escalation and international stability problems. You also have a certain amount of, mostly coming out of the NAM countries, right? These are what we used to call the third world, right? The less wealthy, the global south, arguing, in some cases very overtly, that we don't ever think we're going to have these, and we don't want you to have them, therefore. Those are sort of the general arguments. Over.
Thank you, really helpful. I'll yield the floor.
Thanks, JC. Okay, I have a question in the chat that was next in line from Angus McLean. To what degree does existing law or policy address the potential need for interrupting an autonomous weapon when it is doing something wrong or undesired? Is the standard the same as a manually controlled weapon?
So I'm not a lawyer, so I don't know that I can answer it from that perspective. Good heavens. Okay, am I still here? Good.
We've got you loud and clear.
So I don't really think I can answer it from the law perspective. I know we have a few lawyers in the group. I don't want to finger anybody in particular, but I know I saw some. From a policy perspective, I'm not sure how to answer that. The directive, like I said, it is all about what you would do and the approvals you would need as you're developing this, and then when you field it. It doesn't necessarily say you have to have a kill switch or whatever. Now, it doesn't preclude that, but it also doesn't require it. So, yeah. Over.
Shawn, on that topic, I think the most recent AI principles, which are not law, but, guiding principles,
right,
indicate that we do want to have the ability to turn off these systems. So I wouldn't be surprised if it becomes a requirement over time.
Well, right, but just to be clear, you mean a sort of like a requirement a la the JROC, not a legal requirement.
Ah, yes.
Oh, all right, Mr. Osteen.
Hi. Yeah, I just wanted to sort of piggyback on this conversation and say that, so there's the NGO argument, which we've gone through a little bit, but I'm also interested in, I think it's pretty clear that a large percentage of some of the actual technical experts that will be developing autonomous systems in the future also have the similar reservations. I'm sure that they wouldn't actually have, they might not be expert enough to quote the legalese that we were talking about here, but they also have their concerns. And these are the people that will be building the best autonomous systems that we can field. And I don't think that we have the same constraints, or we have more constraints on whether we can just sort of adopt their technology or bring them into the DoD than some of our adversaries. So I guess I'm wondering how to ensure that we still recruit some of the best talent available given these concerns. Thank you.
So I would say, one, I don't think you should. It's a good question, and I don't say anything that I'm about to say is not meant as a poke at the question or the questioner. But I don't think we should discount the whole thing that happened at Google with respect to Project Maven, for example. I don't think we should discount the crosswalking and cross-talking between those NGOs and those particular Google employees. They're having a dialogue all the time. And, this is part of it, is that we have to, some of what's frustrating is we run into, for example, this argument like there's no governing law. No, we have the law of war. A lot of these people in Silicon Valley, and I use that term in the broadest colloquial sense, not the literal geographic, California only, they frankly have no idea how DoD works, the degree to which DoD conducts extensive reviews of a technical nature, of a policy nature, of a legal, right? The idea that every single weapon system, whether it's autonomous or not, undergoes a legal weapons review, and has for decades. This is not something that we have started doing as a result of AI or autonomy. They don't necessarily know that. So some of our challenge is to educate and explain to them the degree to which we already take prudent measures that are informed by the law, and I would argue all of these things are our ethics in action. Over.
Hey, Shawn, my name is Keshav Campbell here. I'm an AI and security expert in Silicon Valley. I heard Silicon Valley, so I'm replying. Yes, you are right. Most of the things that DoD and Pentagon does with weapon system, especially from AI point of view and security point of view, you're right. Most of us, we do not actually firsthand know about it. That actually creates a challenge for us as well when we design control systems. The only way out that right now we have solved that problem in our case is by recruiting ex-military who understands the codes and the internal processes. By the way of autonomous systems, from technology point of view, I would raise two serious concerns, but fortunately, many of us are working on it. Is number one, false positives, extremely dangerous thing for now. So false positive means you don't really know if the signal coming in is a true signal for operations or what needs to happen. That intelligence needs to be built into the systems in order to filter out noise, especially false positives. And the second is especially breaches into the autonomous systems and controls. They have been on the rise most of the times.
Well, sir, thanks for jumping in. It's actually great to have such a cross-section of an audience to provide that perspective, so thank you. Shawn, I have a question from Dr. Tom Apker in the chat. Along these lines, does a legal requirement for oversight of laws have any impact on the allowable forms of electronic warfare?
Again, the caveat, I'm not a lawyer, so let me start with that. But I think we run into this sort of question and a little bit also in terms of autonomous systems and cyber. So let me say what the directive does and doesn't say. So one, that it absolutely, it has a specific carve out for cyber, among other things. So the directive doesn't apply to cyber, but the directive does say that, for example, among the things that do not require senior review and approval, right, which I already touched on a bit, is anything that is semi-autonomous, right, where the human is making that target selection and then the engagement decision, right? And so if you go to the directive, and boy, will I sound like a bureaucrat here, paragraph 4, Charlie, 1, 2, and 3 lay out the 3 basic carve-outs that do not require senior review and approval, right? So the first is if it's a semi-autonomous weapon system and it doesn't have it doesn't have a mode where if it loses comms, it goes into an automatic, it remains semi-autonomous, etc. So that's number 1. Number 2, I would classify, just for brevity, as human supervised defensive anti-materiel systems. Think Aegis, close-in weapon systems, Patriot and full auto, things like that. And then the last one is autonomous weapon systems that apply non-lethal, non-kinetic force, such as some forms of electronic attack against materiel targets. So here's where I would argue the analog, at least from the DoD directive side, I can't speak to the legal side, for electronic warfare. Nobody, the way I say it tongue in cheek, is nobody ever got jammed to death, right? You're not applying lethal force with with electronic warfare. Now, you might be able to do something with electronic warfare that makes that airplane not fly anymore. And that could have negative effects for any human occupants, pilots, and so forth. But that's still a non-lethal, non-kinetic weapon as far as DoD defines these things. Legally, I'm not as sure, right? Like I said, I'm not a lawyer, and I would want to touch base with my colleagues from OGC. Over.
Thanks, Shawn. We're going to have one more question from Mr. Zacharias, and then we'll close. Mr. Zacharias, you have your hand up. Do you have a question? You're on mute if you're talking. Okay, I'll open the floor to one more question. First come, first serve. No other questions. Yep, there you go. We've got you.
Oh, sorry. Okay, thanks. Hey, Shawn, good to connect with you again. A quick general question and one comment. We've been discussing these as the processes and so forth as almost if then else kind of explicit rule types. And from the test and evaluation community, there's a lot of uncertainty in how these things actually will behave. And we put all our responses in percentages and confidence intervals and so forth. And someone else talked about type 1 errors and so forth. So suppose I come I develop a system and say it's semi-autonomous, therefore I don't have to come in front of this board. But at what confidence level would I have to claim that it's semi-autonomous? Maybe it could turn into an autonomous system because of a cyber attack, let's say, or a system failure. Any thoughts on that?
Well, so one, I guess, I think in part we would rely on. Let me just go back because this is a good segue into a broader question, right? The senior review and approval that is called for under DoD Directive 3000.09 is on top of, right? Is additive to all the other things that the department does anyway, right? So, weapons safety review boards. If the thing had a laser weapon, it would have to go through the processes for directed energy weapons, on and on, right? All the various and sundry things that any old weapon goes through, this thing would go through, even if it does or does not have to go through the senior review and approval as an autonomous weapon per this directive. If it could, if an adversary could gain control of the weapon, right? This is among the things that, as a semi-autonomous or autonomous weapon, I mean, you would be looking for is trying to avoid loss of control of the system to unauthorized parties, right? But that's not, if the system is not designed or intended to be autonomous, and we found that that it had some sort of cyber or other vulnerability that let unauthorized parties take control and change the targeting or whatever, that would be bad, but that's not what this directive, that would be a failure in sort of the cybersecurity and other realm, is not really an autonomy failure per se, I would think. But I would say that this is the sort of thing that other sorts of reviews are intended to cover. It's not a question of being, enabling the commander or operator to exercise appropriate level of human judgment over the use of force. You've lost control of the weapon. I worry because I wouldn't want to say, if you followed this to an extreme approach, you could end up saying every semi-autonomous weapon has to undergo this level of additional senior review and approval because it might be able to be taken over by an adversary and, et cetera. I mean, I think we have to rely on the various and sundry other reviews of the weapon system in the DoD acquisition process. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I agree, and I think that's the issue. I mean, maybe a semi-autonomous system can fail internally and become autonomous, and the T&E community kind of has to give you some odds of that not happening. And then I guess I question what's the cut point on these kinds of decisions. Over.
Roger.
Can I just make one? Sorry.
Absolutely. Go ahead, Greg.
I just my one other comment. We were talking about kill switches, and I think this is related to just what you said. You put a kill switch in there, then you've opened up, an extra attack surface for anybody out there. So it's not an ideal solution. Over.
Roger. And the directive itself, I mean, if any of you aren't really all that familiar with it, and you can find it on the web, and I can make sure that Ryan has a copy, and we can get you access. It's a distro alpha document, but it's full of, I'm looking at right now, para 4 alpha 1 Charlie, ensure that the autonomous and semi-autonomous weapon systems are sufficiently robust to minimize failures that could lead to, right? It's very, sufficiently minimize, right? It's not, it doesn't have a numeric value. It's not saying you have to have an 85% or 100% or, it's full of a lot of that wording like appropriate. Over.
Thank you, Shawn. Appreciate it.
Okay. All right, I know we have a couple more questions. Shawn does have an appointment that he needs to get to, so I'm going to close the session and thank Shawn for a nice, robust discussion and your time. Shawn, I'm going to let you stay on the line as long as you like or leave. And then I'm also happy to answer any questions or field any requests regarding the upcoming Intelligent Autonomous Systems Policy and Ethics Technical Exchange meeting, which is happening next week. So thank you very, very much for your time, Shawn. We look forward to hearing from you next week.
You bet. And for anybody who wants it, right, it's Shawn, SHAWN .m as in Michael .Steene, 3 E's, .civ at mail.mil. Happy to address any questions via email if that works for y'all as well. I can stay for about 5 minutes maybe.
Thanks. Okay. And we will put Shawn's slides up on the technical exchange meeting event page, which was in the meeting invite, and I will put in the chat as well. Shawn's information is also on the presenter page, which is linked off of the event page. So, so thank you very much again, Shawn.